page 2 over there. I'd like to call this work session. There's a work session on the Anchor School District budget. Let's go around the room and identify ourselves for the record.
Forrest Dunbar.
Dick Train.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Pete Peterson.
Fred Dyson.
Sean.
Tom Welton.
Well, this is the 2018-2019 proposed budget. This will be in front of us on Tuesday. And we can only do one thing with this. Either approve it or reject it. We don't have the ability, because over the years, some people wanted to take sections out they don't like programs. We can't do that. We can only do the total dollar amount. And as Rose was nice enough to point out to me, we can't raise it because we're maxed now. There's a state law that says how much we can give them. Even if we had a few $1 million more and wanted to, we couldn't. So that's what we're dealing with. And the way the law is written, if we don't approve it, 30 days after they submit it, it becomes law anyway. So that comes from the thing here. It was a terrible story. Hi, ma'am. How are you? Our superintendent's joining us.
Thank you.
So do you want to go through your budget?
Sure.
Andy or whoever?
Yep. So I'm Dina Bishop, and Andy's here with me in the 2 books you have. I don't know if you went over this already. Nope. So this is the detail budget, which is pretty thick. It will share with you every individual school, everything that you really wanted to know. What I'm going to do is just walk us through the 30,000-foot view, which we did in this pamphlet, and then we can share with you where you can find the information if you have, folks asking, or Andy's here for the detail because he wrote this book, so he could identify it. But the budget proposal really starts with the background of who we are on page 1, and those are just the big, simple statistics, if you will, of the district and our community, languages, students, and the like. The budget starts with the articulation on page 2 of the goals of the school board. We've seen those before. They are the Destination 2020. They have been around since 2011 when they were designed. And we hold ourselves accountable, most recently with the public dashboard on those. On page 3, while we did see, and we'll go into more detail on that, the revenue as compared to our expenditures in a pro forma, if we were to continue doing the same thing, how we were operating, only excluding the number of students not coming to ASD, would have been, like adjusting for enrollment, we would have found a $13 million delta. And so knowing that, we had to make some changes, but those changes weren't without investments in achieving our goals. And so the items that are still investments to meet the goals are on page 3. So we're not taking away. We still want students to grow and learn and reach 21st century goals in our destination.
We've been joined by Mr. Croft. Hello, sir.
Hi. The next page 4, and I've shared this at our joint meeting, is literally the state foundation formula and local taxes, how those come into conjunction through the state funding formula. They are steps, and we design them as they show up and how they multiply the funds with the school size adjustment, and that's the one we always refer to in regard to holding us. We do have, just as a side note, we did get an amendment to a bill in Juneau that would allow Anchorage, if we were held harmless for a few years, to be able to adjust ourselves in size-wise, because you are funded by the number of students, but you're also layered on that is the size of the school. So for operationally, we've discussed before, merging schools, closing schools is difficult when you continue to have to pay operations, but the capital is in a different funding unit. So we're working on that. But as you go through, it's the district cost factor. Anchorage is the 1. So we don't, whatever that is just multiplying by 1, and anything by 1 is, of course, that same number. There's a special needs factor.
Just on that issue, I'm putting to our upcoming budget revision $145,000 for a study for ICER. I meet next week with ICER people to see if that's what it's going to cost. Because we have to have budget revisions, and according to Rose, they want the information today. So then it will be up to Assembly we decide to appropriate the money. It's just the foundation formula is based on the study that was done, what, 15, 12 years ago?
Yeah, 12 years ago.
And Alaska's changed, so we need a new ICER to be done and then get the state to adopt it. It's a new study. That'll dramatically affect the amount of money we have coming into the state. For us, it could be worth $10 million. So what I'm going to do is ask the assembly, once I get the exact numbers down from ICER, to appropriate that money out of the city budget. Why are we doing it? Because they're our kids. Whether they go to school district or not, they're our children. We need to take care of them. So anyway, yes, Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if they change the formula and we get an additional 10 million, that means schools in other parts of Alaska get $10 million less? Is that how it works?
You know what?
Zero-sum game type of thing?
It would depend on what money is placed. Each year, the legislature decides on the money being placed into education.
Right.
So it technically could grow, or it could technically redistribute the same amount of money. Both are true, but we wait to there isn't forward funding that you know of. So every year they're deciding on the education bill.
Eric?
What bill did you get an amendment in on this school size factor adjustment?
May I get that back to you? Yes, I'll send that.
I don't recall
Yeah.
that.
Please continue, I'm sorry.
Did you have a question as well?
Yeah, sorry.
I guess I didn't.
I'm slow, but I think Pete was on to something. So if we get more, and it's a fixed sum that the legislature allows, why wouldn't other places get less?
And so the point I was trying to make was politically that could be difficult to get passed through the legislature.
Absolutely.
Because if you're in an area where you're getting slightly more than your share now, you're going to want to continue to slightly get more than your share. You don't want to see your area get cut, and then the big city of Anchorage, with all our advantages, gets the 10 million. That's going to be a tough sell.
But we first have to have a study done by ICER to determine how big the elephant is that's out there.
Right.
It could be a hit on the Matsu school.
Right.
It could not, it could be nothing. It could be the standard formula that does work. But it was so long ago the study was done, we really need to give them the information. And I can't see even the legislature wanting to spend their own money if they think it's going to hurt their school district.
Right.
Yes, Eric?
Yeah, all on that, and it's sort of ex-legislators talking about what might be done, but yeah, it would be a zero-sum game. But the way they've solved that in every rewrite, right, has been when there are winners and losers, they often will put enough money in to hold harmless so that there's gainers and not real losers. So there are ways when you do that to sort of soften the impact. And you're right, Mr. Chairman, that we really just need to know the data. We feel like we're not the lowest cost place in Alaska anymore, and whether that was true then, it ain't true now. But we need the data to be able to prove it and have a rational discussion about actually it's cheaper in some other places to live, and so we should adjust it. But I do think then there's a lot of ways you might be able to hold harmless or do it.
Just want to let the body know that I have put that in as an amendment. Then it's up to this body as you want to appropriate the money. I meet with ICER, 3 o'clock next Friday, Rose? And we'll figure out exactly what this ICER study. We think it's $145,000, which is a lot of money. But if we stand to bring more millions of dollars into the Anchorage School District, I'm willing to put that money forward. May I please continue?
Chairman, also, I did research it myself. It is a risk because you open it up, but by the same token, when I've researched other states, they actually have statutory requirements to do a report every 10 years. So most states adjust their funding to their public schools in their state by a study every 10 years. So by those terms, we're 12 out, going to be 13. So.
Yes, John.
That's an interesting point. When I look at this way they come up with this formula, like you get ADN and ADM, and I think most people read this and think, oh, that's how many kids in the school. It's not that at all. It's this totally bizarre step-by-step thing we're coming up with.
Yeah, so it's ADM, average daily membership, which is an FTE account. So we technically have an ADM and we're calculating it at, the start is 45,647, but that's full-time equivalent, kind of like you would, so you technically could have 2 students go into an ADM that makes one student. But then it's the AA, the adjusted ADM, and literally these are seen as multipliers. They just multiply more to say educating different kids with different needs have different expenses.
And I understand that going through it also comes across as totally arbitrary and bizarre. So, and you're telling me other states do the same thing?
No,
Let's go with that,
other states do, not our formula, but other states do studies every 10 years to readjust how they fund. They don't use our same
I
formula,
understand that,
but
they do,
every 10 years they will adjust.
and they'll do a cost factor, and they do this 13, your intensive needs times 13.
Other states
all
do
that
pay
stuff.
more for special education. Yes, their formulas look different, but they do. And interesting enough, about 3 or 4 years ago, ISO did a study on our formula, and they said actually it is a good, equitable formula because it does take into account. The one thing that they did find problematic was the step number 6 with a course, and that's why we captured that students in correspondence schools actually do get services for special education, but they're not funded for it. So they did acknowledge that your special education funding for students in correspondence schools actually is flawed because services are being provided, but it's used from money that you get elsewhere. So that was one of the items that they came up with.
Yes, Eric.
Just real briefly on that, is that likely a big impact on us? That is, my impression is that we had a lot of the special needs kids and a lot of the correspondence with ASD from our fall. Is your estimate that that works to our detriment in the sense that there are special needs kids here in Anchorage in correspondence and we're just doing 0.9 instead of an appropriate amount for dealing with those special needs?
So as far as the state goes and how large our correspondence schools are, we're very small. I would love to get into that market. It's choice market because flexibility and blended learning is the future. I would say that the services is provided, and it doesn't matter. Wherever a child lives, we bring them into the system. If they aren't enrolled in Anchorage School District, we do have an ability to work with another school district to say we want to get them 0.25 at the time since we're actually educating in them. But it just depends on how it works out. So it is a flawed system from the beginning because it's negotiated at the table rather than just funded for services.
Thank you.
Neil? Yes. Garrison?
If I'm reading this right, on step 6, had roughly 1,000 kids in correspondence, and you get 90% of them. Or, so it doesn't have a percent sign, so 9. But I understand it's 0.9.
We're funded at 90 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, so I would guess you make money at that. That those 1,000 kids don't cost 90% of what a kid in bricks and mortar.
Well, I don't.
And really, those are all
They're
charter
charter
schools.
schools, so the district doesn't have, that's funds only to charters. Our correspondence schools in Anchorage are all charter schools. That's why I said I'd love to get into it.
So they have a facility.
Family partnership, they're all rented spaces. Because correspondence isn't just give me a packet, it's actually didactic and
For those
active.
that are
They
older,
come-
we think of correspondence as by mail or some other form.
It could be, but it's students attend school, they take courses at other schools. We have quite a bit of students who attend KCC from our charter schools, or they'll do, a very popular one is ROTC. So that's anything that is difficult to offer in one modality. They might choose to come in, and we want our schools to be open like that because they live in our communities, so we want to support it. In Anchorage, having correspondence be charter schools, a charter is run by a different body, not the school board. And so, again, it's back to the negotiations of how it's done, because the charters have all of their funding go to them. So to pay for something in another, and generally CTE courses are the most expensive in a school district, it does cost. So we work it out with the families.
Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, I'm just surprised that the correspondence charter schools are 90% as expensive as the kids that are in the facilities with all the staff and stuff that are in those buildings. not questioning it, it just surprises me.
I wouldn't say they're as expensive. I say that they can choose to spend their money how they want, and they spend the whole amount. I don't have any control over their spending.
And part of it is
Yeah.
they're coming in at the end of the formula rather than the beginning where they get all the multipliers. So we get multiplied on all these other students, but on the correspondence, we don't get those other like special education multipliers to increase
Career
that
check
ADM.
multipliers, yeah, they're not getting all those. But to your point, kids aren't in school every single hour of the
Yeah.
day, but there are learning spaces that they rent out and things like that.
And yeah, I'm still skeptical, but just 45,000 here that's the raw number of student bodies, people. and the kids.
ADM, not the raw number of kids. The raw number of kids is upward of 48,000. This is just the ADM, which is like the average daily membership, or an
Good job, Mr.
FTE,
Steele, by the way.
or an FTE.
Everybody.
But correspondence kids, the number of kids, they don't have any other multiplier, and they get 90 cents on the dollar. But
All right, that's helpful.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
All right.
there are kids who go there who are gifted. They are in other, interest in other things. The question is, should they also have access?
All right, thank you.
But the total budgets of our correspondence schools are decided by their APCs, not the district.
Not just a piece of esoteric. Do you ever, I structured that part-time student thing so that you actually make a little money. Remember the part-time student takes 2 hours class, you get the money. Do you ever quantify that?
We do, and it's advantageous to us. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what I've engineered. When I had a lesson like school superintendent.
It's always nice when we can have the author of that here.
Yeah, for a full-time student, you'd think 6 hours or 7 classes. You only need 4 to make a full-time student. Yeah. So it's,
Well, please continue.
okay, so the formula just shares the math that's going into, that shares you take the ADM and it becomes the actual, that's the adjusted ADM rather, and then times it by the base student allocation, which is 5,930 students, or $30 rather. It gives you the basic need is the number that determines local contribution. And there's a minimum, I believe, of 25% of basic need and allowable up to 100%. So if you take the required local taxes, which is the third section down, that's what's required. But as you can see, the allowable taxes is up to $208 million, and that is what our city provides at the maximum, which is
That's what our request is going to be.
a request, yeah. And we have had a track record of providing for the maximum
Yep.
allowable. But the amount of taxes that can be taken in is based on that basic need. If you can see the general fund, page 5, if you take a look, we really spend the majority of the money on instruction as it should be. Special education instruction, the operations and maintenance of the plant, and there's been discussions of that. That's actually some primarily preventative maintenance, as well as there is some large-scale maintenance that we do pay for ourselves. The rest is bonded.
And utilities are included in that amount as well.
Yeah.
So that's
In simple terms, the percentages of what goes into the largest sections are at the bottom there. And you could take the general fund revenue as well as the expenditures and see the different pieces.
that's on page 6.
On page 7, this is really discussion at the state level, so you can have an idea of what is the adjusted average daily membership, the state contribution. And although the BSA, or the base student allocation, is $5,930, as you can see, when you adjust it and run it through the formula, if we took all of our funds, did simple math, divided by the number of students, or the number of ADM, then that's the amount of money that we have in our budget per student. So educating a child, and you can see that revenue per student, educating a child in Anchorage is about $12,000 a child. That's how much money is spent locally as well as state level and federal. This is the first year that you can see that it went down slightly, not by a significant amount of money, but the federal government, primarily when we were talking right before this, the federal government ran an E-rate program. They fund data for the school district. E-rate is, I would say, the majority of people who take advantage of it are from Alaska because of our distance. And they had modernization of equipment, and we were able to qualify for modernization of our equipment, which is like the wireless and the servers. Well, now that we've upgraded that, the money is down to just paying for a portion of that bandwidth. So as you see, the total amount goes down, but it really was related to federal dollars for technology, not any other
I have a
reason.
question for you, related to bandwidth and wireless. I was talking this week, there was a meeting in DC, talking to some cities in which they've put wireless on the buses so the kids can do their homework. Because many kids don't have access at home, economic reason. And so this gives them, if they've got a computer, a way to do their homework on the way to and from school. And we looked at putting that on the city buses, using federal dollars for bandwidth, to spread it out.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I mean, we have, and I have in the past, done things like that, and they were generally for longer bus rides. Our students are very small on the bus rides, except for if you went to Girdwood. We are looking at ways to put wireless on our buildings, and in talks with our provider now to have wireless posts on our buildings and have families have access between a certain amount of time and kids have login. So we're in discussions with that to be able to use federal money. But again, because it's federal money, we have to ensure all the legalities that it isn't open to everyone. We have to have a way to get into our system. So we are working on ways to have, even outside of buses, we've discussed buses, but for more access for people at home when it's actually a better place to do homework. We've are in discussion of getting those wireless posts on our schools. In addition, they've taken wireless vans and been able to pull up into certain neighborhoods so that they will log in, not just on the bus, but certain hours. We know when our bandwidth is mostly used, and it's at night, not during the day. They're generally not doing their homework when they're pulling our bandwidth. They're generally, when they pull the bandwidth with school, logging into school, it happens in the evenings. So we use data just to
The argument was is that disenfranchisement among the minorities and the poor that don't have access to the internet, and we're in a world in which you have to have access to the internet to get your homework done. I mean,
Absolutely.
As we were kids, we'd have people come around selling encyclopedias to your parents. Remember those time periods? They went away years ago. Everybody has a homework they get on the internet, but I worry about these kids who don't have access to that.
Presently, through some programs, through federal grants, we are able to provide access at home right now on a limited basis. We pay for it. But this would be just to blow the top off the system if our schools, if they could be in close location to the schools to be able to log in. So we are in discussions with that. It's just working the funding through the federal government.
Let's hope we can help at all. This is
Yeah.
something we really need to do. So thank you.
I think they pay right now in our district 60% of our bandwidth. I think we're 60-40
Yes,
district. Some districts are 90-10 in Alaska, with the federal government paying your bandwidth.
Mr. Chairman.
Sir.
Thank you. Having spent thousands of hours riding a bus, I can tell you, trying to do
Driver or
homework,
student?
trying to do homework on that bus is not always very productive, and the work that you do is not always very, very well done. So, encouraging kids to do their homework is great, but I just don't think it wouldn't be very effective to do it on the bus. Now, an adult commuting on a bus or a train to work, it's a different situation. But when you got 10 or 12-year-old kids on the bus, it's a fluid situation, we'll put it that way.
People I were talking to, they said they got dramatic increase in the homework from kids that take a long bus ride from school, because they can get it done.
A longer bus ride possibly, yeah.
Ours are really small. But to that point, we study the analytics of when kids are going through our system and actually getting onto Facebook or getting onto our learning channels. And it's not right after school. They're night owls. They do it at night. So we're trying to target the biggest use of finding out how we can offer that for that same reason.
Thank you, Mindy.
You heard me thinking.
Mr. Dyson, I heard something creeping.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
I don't know where to go, or-
If you would go ahead.
So, you, amongst the many enlightened things you do is let kids, parents choose to have what school to go to, so that parents have to provide the intermodal transportation. Do you have any sense for how not having transportation keeps parents from making their choice? So choosing a school is not in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And parents that couldn't afford to do that or couldn't provide for it.
Well, we know that there's a relationship between someone's socioeconomic status and being able to choose a school, a choice school that's on our lottery. So it's evident in the students who attend our lottery schools.
Yeah.
So we have been in discussions that, it doesn't sit well with principals of how can we increase the access and the choice, but a lot of times, the busing that would need to be set up, there isn't enough money to pay for anyone to go anywhere. So we're looking at ways that we can use the system that we already have with KCC really runs on a bus system where all the high schools deliver to KCC and then disperse out. So we're King Career Center. Yeah, sorry, King Tech next year. So we're looking at ways that we could figure out how that system works to get kids where they need to go, or just hubs that if you can get your child to cars in this area of town, we will take them to the other and then bring them back. So just even the smaller distances.
I got it. I don't want to bog us down with my esoteric questions. How's the native charter school doing?
As far as academically? Or,
Yes.
they're struggling. I mean, very high engagement with parents, student achievement. We're like all of our schools, we're not where we want to be.
Its first year, it was top. Not just because my granddaughter was there, but near miraculous. Thank you.
So, community feedback, we shared with our lots of information. What is it that you'd like to see in your schools? So we did this back in October, and class size, clean and safe schools and facilities, and effective and rigorous course offerings. We did learn that clean and safe are two different constructs, that we need to separate those out. We'll be doing that next year. Effective and rigorous course offerings is the effect in high school of class size. So at elementary school, if we reduce teachers, we increase class size. At high school, if you reduce teachers, you narrow your course offerings. So 1 and 3 are actually very similar. And clean and safe, we did get that feedback that clean and safe are, again, different constructs, especially after Stoneman Douglas. So we're going to adjust that. Under personnel reductions, if you take a look, FY18, which is this present year, is the top chart, and that demonstrates where we are with our student enrollment, and the bottom is where we will be next year, creating the budget where we are. Outside of these numbers to note in 7th and 8th grade, or 7 through 12, is that our ELL staffing, which is an additional 30 teachers, and our gifted or some specialized classes rather, ROTC, things like that, are outside of that number. So when you actually take the number of kids in a classroom, or PTR, it's down to about 30.5, not 31. But again, when we talk about the PTR, pupil-teacher ratio, it is just a funding mechanism. It's not a class size maximum or minimum. You will find class sizes larger than 31, and you will find class sizes much less than 31 at the high school. It's just that for every 31 teachers, another FTE of staffing is added. Our career tech courses are about 8 to 12 students in each class. English classes are about 30 to 35 students. So there's a difference just set up in the classes that they are. A lot of reteaching classes we keep small. Advanced classes, they're much larger with self-motivated students. So it just depends. And each school, once they're given their FTE, they look at their own students' needs and their own staffing and then design their master schedules. District does not design the master schedules at the secondary schools. So that just shares where we are increasing the PTR at the secondary level. Secondary is 7 through 12. Our staffing overview of the last, I believe, 5 years, you can see the reductions that have been made over time. So we are in a reduction mode over the last 5 years. And those are the areas, those descriptors are the chart of accounts that are statutory. So we didn't make those up. That's how you report it, that's how you're audited. So in each of those sections, it depends on what person does. District administration has nothing to do with children. School administration and support services. So the school administration, the person who works, the secretary or admin who works for the principal is in this category as well. So anybody that is removed from students, directly servicing students, will fall into these administrative categories. Even though it might be out of school, they're not directly related to teaching a child. This just shares really what were the changes this year overall. So page 9 is a good summary. If you look at the changes in elementary school, that box kind of shares the general metrics in an elementary school. Schools are going to have librarians, nurses, office administration, and plant operators, which is our day custodians. If you look at the changes, the only reductions made at elementary school are due to enrollment. So we didn't change the metric, but we have fewer students, and those 14 are spread around our city. The Creating Successful Futures program was the secondary 3 through 5, or the intermediate. We didn't have students and teachers selecting that program. It didn't service the kids to support it, so we're putting those staff back in buildings. Again, counselors are appropriated due to a metric on enrollment, so enrollment decreased. And we still do have about 16 holdback teachers, we call them, which means they're still yet to be assigned to schools. And basically, so we know where students are is where teachers go. So teachers are assigned to schools according to enrollment. Our first take, but because we do allow choice, the students might choose to go to a different school, we need to have the staffing follow, so we hold back some staffing. So there's still about 16 in elementary, 17 in secondary to still be processed out.
Mr. Dunbar has a question.
Thank you. More of a comment, but maybe you could just tell me if I'm misinterpreting this. And it's something we talked about before, and I know that you can't. Right now, the way the state formula is constructed, if you consolidate schools, you lose a lot of money, right? But if you look at these tables you've given us here, certainly the one on page 9, and to a lesser extent to page 10 and 11, you have the same number of nurses, the same number of librarians, basically the same number of those kind of support staff, regardless of whether you have 300 students up to 750 students, right? Or on the next page, or in 2 pages, Eagle River, with 866 students, has the same number of librarians as East, with more than twice that number, right? So it seems like these charts would push you pretty strongly towards consolidating some schools if the facilities were large enough and if that state funding formula were not punitive. Is that correct?
Correct, and we do, I've seen preliminary report, there's about 3 schools that would be over time recommended to transition into different buildings. And that'll come out I think they're working with the city people right now to ensure the growth and where it is. That is true. We are going to save. What we did was, the closest number we got was 800,000, and that was eliminating all of these positions. If you took away the principal, took away the librarian, you still would be about 800,000 short, which is not that much, really, because the capital expense would be millions to put tax capital into a building, right? So we get that, and that's the tipping point, is the capital side of it. However, I want to let you know there were discussions to use metrics on librarians at elementary schools and use metrics on nurses for size of school. Absolutely. And at this point in time, you pick your battles. Once something is, probably just like in your city, once you find a way that you don't want to, you want to have all the things that you want, but we need to be more efficient, we have less money, we need to cut. When there's ideas that come up, there's people rally around them, they build walls, and then that becomes an untouchable. I can't imagine in our city to talk about reducing librarians. I would be slaughtered. So I mean, there's just some things you can do and don't do. Principals, teachers have brought that up, but teachers and librarians are in the same situation. They're in the same union. They're in the same. I mean, it's really about all of us hurting because of the reductions, and we feel like we're pointing fingers. And so, I want to let you know the ideas that came forward from schools and parents and included those things that you're talking about, and it's just, how are we going to be able to get to a budget decision that people could rally around and move forward, knowing that this is the 5th year of reductions. I believe that probably in time we'll get there. What's going to happen with nurses and what's happening now is that we cannot hire full nurses anymore, RNs, because we can't compete with the hospitals.
Well, they get paid there at the hospital. They can't.
Right. Well, it used to be what we could offer was the greatest schedule on earth, right? I want to have a family. I want to be off in the summer. Now hospitals are offering these 3 months on, 6 months. We can't compete in the market for RNs, so we are using kind of a wheel and spoke where we have RNs in charge of LPNs. LPNs can do help with diet, can do some things, but they can't do it all. So we're using the supervisory. That's literally where we have to go, because we had 8 nursing positions open. They weren't here. So the market is going to push some of those changes because they're not going to be here. But it hasn't been for a lack of trying to look at things outside of the classroom. We really have tried, but it's just.
You're under control right now. Forrest and then Fred.
Well,
But
yeah, I mean,
yes is the simple answer to your question.
Well,
It
no,
can be done.
I'm not suggesting that you go below a full-time librarian if there is a library
Yeah.
there. But what I'm talking about is, if there are schools that are merged or combined in some ways, then you have 1 library instead of 2. I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but if you look at the East High School, for example, on that page, East High School has more students than Eagle River and Shugak combined. And I don't want to just pick on Mr. Dyson's district, but then you look at the support staff, and it's just, you add up Eagle River and Shugak's support staff, and it's disproportionate, right? Relative to East, is what I'm saying.
There's a base
per
minimum,
student.
so all of these metrics
Right.
come with a base minimum of 3 administrators.
Right.
So you wouldn't have a large-scale high school without 3. So there's a base
Right.
and then an additional add-on. So that's correct. And to your point, though, I mean, each of these schools, so if you were to eliminate Eagle River High School and took away all the administrative staff not teaching with children, you would still lose in operational money. The
Because of
closest we
the
could
state-
get.
yeah.
Because of
the state
all
formula.
those multipliers, right? And that's why we're saying, hold us harmless on those multipliers. Let us change, regroup, readjust, get used to this, and then move into the future. Because the difference is the capital money. The difference will never be, with all those multipliers, the state favors small schools. We would get more money if East High, for everyone, if East High was 2 schools.
Right.
But because the state supports small schools in its formula, and the majority of schools in the state are small, so I think that's a great thing, the operations, until you put capital money on the table for taxpayers, it doesn't make sense. You can bring more to your kids in their classrooms, hire more teachers, do all that great stuff because of the small schools and the funding. So that's why in Anchorage, when we have our schools built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they're literally falling apart. That's when you have to ask yourself, okay, now how are we responsible with what goes on internally as well as the external output of that school? What really makes sense with where we are as a community? And that's why we brought in Western Demographics, because really, truly, it's going to come out to suggest, and the board is going to need some cover, because people are gonna say, it's great to be efficient and shut down schools, but not in my neighborhood, by golly. And we need to convince people that we're a community together, and with narrowing schools, there will be a proposal to say, look at what we can do. We wanna offer really cool things operationally when we're taking something away. It has to be, and I know we can get there because what we have and the ideas are great, but in some areas it doesn't make sense to keep schools open.
Fred and then Chris.
Yeah, so it's sad from a management perspective when we structure in financial disincentives to do the best policy. And we need to help you fight that battle, because it is irrational. So back in the day, we had what used to be called school within a school. There'd be a specialty school of some sort within the same building. And it gave some pretty efficient use of space. Two-point question. Is any of that going on? And secondly, are you using any vacant space in some of the buildings for the charter schools?
Aquarian is in a district facility,
Okay.
the Old Northern Lights. And yes, the outcome, right now the talk is that two of the places can still be used and to bring charter schools in. And we have our leases on charter schools, we're already talking to them to say, hey, your lease is up in 2 years, let's think about this. So again, it won't be preliminary in April, the end of April, it'll be public, and then all those things can come out.
Not surprised you're ahead of me, as
Yeah.
usual. And also, there's always been intersectional warfare anytime you try to change the boundaries in order to stuff like that. Are there any low-hanging fruit out there?
There's boundary changes in that plan as well. So, I mean, it's gonna be the talk of the board for, but you know what, it's gonna happen this spring, and then all the changes would not be for next year, they'd be for the year after. So we'd have a whole year to talk about it, discuss it. But there's about 4 boundary changes, because we do have schools that are 127, and then somebody that's 65, that we really are within a mile of each other. So it's just smart thinking, but people in Anchorage, we've gone to schools for generations, 4 generations. That's what makes it so
Very
difficult.
territorial. I've been here for a long time.
Yeah.
Fred, anything else? I'm going to Chris.
No, but please understand, I really admire the fact that you're way ahead on all these things and trying to work the problem. But I think we owe it to our responsibilities to help fight against the structural system that keeps us from doing the innovative thing. You've got to do what's best for the kids, what's the best use of the facilities, and oh, by the way, not screw up the funding stream.
Yeah.
Good. Before I go to Chris, let me interject myself into here. I'm more than happy to support you guys if you want to shut down Central. Because I have this dream one day that we take Central, make that City Hall, we get out of this building. It saves the city a lot of money since we own Central. The city does, make a great City Hall. Go ahead, Chris.
And there's charter schools who want to go in Central.
Go ahead, Chris.
I have to chew on that for a second.
Think about it.
Oh, no, I've thought about it. This brings up a point to the concern that I'm about to raise. Obviously, I represent the district that has the highest concentration of elderly people in the city. Although there are pockets in other parts of town that have some of that. And I have had this conversation long and hard with some people. And, there are difficulties with our choice system when you recognize already on the record that people who have means are able to make the choice and people without means are unable to make the choice. And that leaves pockets of schools where people who can't make choice don't have the resources to have the highest quality education our city can provide. And so that, you answered, I think, in part that boundary changes are an answer to that in some ways. When you see those schools having white flight and people leaving because they can. I know 4 people who left Fairview Elementary in the last 3 years to move into West Anchorage because the schools are better for my kids. What systems are in place for planning for equity?
Our funding is based around equity, and I would say that people aren't leaving because of excellence in another school, they're probably leaving for other reasons. Because I want to let you know that the instruction that is going on in our schools,
They're leaving because they're uncomfortable with their children in those schools. I can
there you
tell
go. Yeah, yeah, totally get it. And so there's many reasons why they're uncomfortable with their kids in schools. So, but I would not say that the schools on the lottery are better schools than our neighborhood schools. So that's right. But
I would agree with you, except in perception, which then is a result is in formula funding because the kids are leaving, right? They're not getting the same amount of funding because the kids.
No, because we have money per kids, but we fund. We're more likely in schools that have a higher need or a low socioeconomic status to fund more people at those schools. So we do put more. Our assistant principals, our counselors, full-time nurses, additional teachers, they go to where the student need is. It's based on student need. And that's why, I mean, there was just a conversation at the board meeting about my school doesn't have a counselor, how come that one does? And it was by a school that was fairly majority Anglo-white against a school that was more varied with socioeconomic as well as ethnicity. So equity to us is not the same. And at the board meetings, the public testimony, we hear the other side where they're angry about that, and we just have to continue to communicate. Our goal is for all kids to reach this level. So we are investing in places, and part of the Western demographics, so you know, the study was to invest. It is to keep solid and build up access where school in actual areas where there wouldn't be another opportunity to leave because of work or whatever, or driving a kid. So one of the key features of not shutting down a school was that it wasn't low socioeconomic. You know, that just so you know, in the elementary realm. So we are speaking the same thing. That is the equity issue in our district. It is really back on us all to just see it as a spotlight, not as an I gotcha. We share now on our dashboard, how are our kids of poverty doing? Do they have access? Are their outcomes the same as other kids? And if they're not, we ask ourselves why then. Alaska Native, Polynesian, we're asking ourselves those questions, and we're talking about them in schools. So
We've got 10 minutes left. I got 3
Yeah,
seconds.
one quick follow-up then is, so we see all these amazing documents on budget. How can I follow that analysis that you do internally so I can understand how you're measuring equity and performance and all of those elements? Because it seems kind of an off-the-books measure.
it's on the data dashboard. So we look at outcomes as well. So the outcome is in how do people like their school? I mean, there's a climate survey that you get of your feel, but there's also outcomes of schools. So if you go to, on our new website, Community, and go to data dashboard, you can look up the schools in your neighborhood compared to other schools in the district. You can look up third grade African American kids in your schools as to third grade African American kids in somebody else's. It literally is the aggregate of any extant data that we already have. We make it public because initially it needs to be public to us all internally first, because we just didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't think that, but it's loud and clear. And if your outcomes aren't matching for your students, what do we have influence on that we can change? That is what we want to ask ourselves. We can't influence everything, but what we can, we're trying to.
Thanks. And can we get a briefing on that at some point in a future meeting on how that
We
works?
know we have joint school board assembly meeting. I think it's a topic to bring up.
Yeah.
The next one. Let's see, Ken?
Yeah, thank you very much. Superintendent, first off, I think you did a good job. I think our schools are doing good. Obviously, we've had to make some cuts. How do the schools that have joint operations like Roaming West, connecting with the library, they have other joint activities, are they penalized, or are they doing more with less because of that proximity? Diamond Chinook is another example of joint campus.
To your question, there's quite a bit of sharing. They have one librarian, one IMC, so they both use it. But I would say that we're charging the leadership to do that. So it is a fantastic partnership. I've heard this year lots of good things and sharing between the two schools of resources of counselors, of assistant principals when someone's gone, of teachers in one area covering for another, or sharing ideas and students and mentoring. So there is a lot of cross-pollination, if you will, with both. As far as financially,
But aside from the librarian, the shared librarian, everything else is separated in metric space, just like all the other schools.
but they do have some special programs inside of those schools that they share as well that makes it less expensive, like the highly gifted and things. We're just trying to work smarter instead of seeing things as all separate.
Wes has the advantage of having the middle school principal, having fleeted up, if you will.
And so he knows, he knows how to get into the system.
So he certainly understands. The other, just quickly, the other thing, the resource officers. The resource officers spend more time at the high school level, certainly, but they're also right there on site. And I think that gives people a lot of, I think program is fantastic. So just a little feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. John? And then Suzanne.
Backing up a little bit, when you talk about closing schools at some point, what is our role? We'll be asked a lot of questions about that.
Well, you're going to have the school. I mean, it's going to belong to the city.
They
And
still belong to the city. We own the buildings.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean by, so there still be, what do we want to do with the schools, questions with the schools. There is some statutory requirements to Member Dyson's point that for the use of facilities, there's House Bill 278 that went through that the first look has to be for charter schools to go into schools. So we have to go through some processes before we get to here's a school. I don't think, there's been about 5 different schools that have been, since I've been here, that people said, oh, you should close this, whatever. Some of those are on discussion, some of them aren't. But really, it would be, we would take public feedback, the board would have to make a determination. DEED would agree, because they're all school funding sites. We work it out with DEED, and then really in constant communication with, now we have a facility. We went through the state protocol of what we had to do to offer a facility, and now it's an empty facility. How do we work with it? I mean, I've been in a place where they tore the school down because it was cheaper to flatten it than it was to keep it up and heat it, or keep people out of it for safety reasons because they could get hurt. I've been where they've, bless you, moved district offices into schools or city things into schools. So I've had the experience of all of those things happening.
But before we get to that, they'll go, John, don't let them close the school. And I'm like, we have a process, and we're not really involved with that. We don't.
I'm sure it's a political process, and politics is based on pressure and constituents. So there's always, like, even the board with this recommendation of efficient funding and money, and we still might say the best thing for our community is not to close it. And we're willing, the opportunity cost for that is worth it to keep that school open. And I think that very well might happen. In other cases, I think it might be, you're right, we're good with that. This is what we get in exchange for that. And there might be enough of a advance that people will say, I like this idea. Because it isn't just close schools and cut, it is, let's do this instead. And that's what we're trying to do, is have a win-win so that we can move community along.
Last 5 minutes of yours, Suzanne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two-part question. Is it about 20 teacher reductions that are not due to decreased?
Specifically 25.
25.
There's about 50 total, and 25 are due to straight out change in the metric, and 25 are due to enrollment. This year, our enrollment kind of caught us off guard, and we used our fund balance to keep the positions there, even though we were over 600 students below, so we're catching up on that. That's why it's so significant. Really, we only project about 267 students below, I think, if that's the number, around 250, between 250 and 300, but we're catching up on the ones that we didn't reduce last year.
Okay.
We used fund balance instead.
And we had received, thank you for that, an email regarding elimination of the library automation specialist. Is that a position that would be under the library assistant?
No.
No, that would be within an administrative account. It's an administrative position
Yeah.
with the library services. I believe they help, or the function is kind of cataloging the video inventory.
But it's antiquated, so we don't use
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
We do, yeah.
So the analysis.
It may be more about a person than a position, and we certainly want to keep people, but they would have to do a different job.
Okay, so in terms of impact analysis, maybe have.
It doesn't impact our libraries.
Okay.
Fred, last comment, sir, and we're going to end this work session and go on to the next one.
So I was looking through this stuff in the back up here, and I was hoping I would see as it goes through each school here, what the number of students. And I'd like to be able to easily figure out the total budget for that school, and how many students. Do it in there?
Our system isn't quite there yet because that's what I'm used to too, saying to educate a kid in this building, it costs this much, this building. And a lot of, just so you know, the differences are, if I have a speech language program in a school,
Yep.
I'm going to have more adults, so it's going to
Right.
cost more than,
No, I got that.
right? But
But all the regular educational staffing and costs, it starts on about page 148 within your document.
and then you can
That's when
see
we
how
get to
many
the schools.
teachers, how many, yeah. It just doesn't include the specialized programs that are in there,
All right,
so.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cooley.
Well, we'll see you on Tuesday night.
And if you have
Final
any
comments from
questions.
the school board? District?
No, I just want to thank the Assembly for supporting SROs in our schools. That it does mean I meet with Chief Dahl regularly. We have some new plans moving in the future for our safety and our communication, which is primary and paramount. So thank you for that, and we're going to do our best to address the concerns in
I'm
our
glad you
community.
got the SROs, because I was talking to the school districts last week, with me on that, and different ways to handle them. Some schools don't have them. Some they're forced to pay for them, they don't have the money to do it. So I appreciate the SROs we have and the role they play in public safety.
And of
This
course,
meeting is over.
supporting schools 100%.
Thank you.
Thank you.